the major problems we have. And so we want to know how young people factor into that. Are young people also perpetrators? They certainly are victims, but what are the statistics telling us? And so that's what we really wanted to know last week. And so this week, we're talking about education, right? We know that everybody has a right to education. Young people have a right to education. And so we're having that discussion to see what are the statistics telling us? What are the numbers telling us? Are young people in school? Are they learning? Are they absorbing, what we've been teaching? I remember last year when we saw the mathematics statistics, where about 13% of the young people in Jamaica pass CSEC math. And we were in outrage and we were saying, how comes we have so much traffic at morning time for the people them only about 30, for only 30% of them are pass maths? So we really want to know what the statistics are saying. Was there a learning loss during COVID? Are we losing young people? Are young people falling through the gaps? And so that's what the discussion today will highlight. Just for your information, we are recording this meeting. So if you don't want to be recorded, well, you may just have to not be a part of the meeting, but we're recording just for our internal purposes, and we won't be sharing without your permission, especially if you speak. So if you speak or contribute in any way where the recording picks up your name and your voice, we'll be reaching out to you for permission before we do any kind of sharing. So just so you know. All right. Do we have any questions or concerns before we jump into our discussions? No? No? All right. So, all right. So we have three experts ready and lined up to talk to you about education, right? So we recognize education as our right. Every child has the right to education. Every child must be in school. Every child should get education up to a particular level and is guaranteed by our state, right? And every Jamaican child, at least most Jamaican children, live within a 5-mile radius of a school. So they can at least walk to school, right? So we understand that education is something that we really want. The government has been pushing for. We have a whole ministry dedicated to over the decades. And so we want to have that discussion. And so we have three amazing presenters. We have with us Assistant Chief Education Officer of Guidance and Counseling, Kennedy Davidson. We also have Andrea Edwards Brown, and she is Senior Director for the Cross-Sectional Coordination for the Early Childhood Commission. And we also have Rebecca Torteo, who is the education specialist at UNICEF Jamaica. All right, and so we're going to be inviting Andrea Edwards Brown from the Early Childhood Commission to share with us. And she'll be talking to us about early childhood interventions and the role of foundational learning in long-term outcomes. Very interesting to me. My mother teaches 4-year-olds. She teaches the babies, and she's been in the early childhood system for a while. And so we want to learn how making sure our babies get it right from an early childhood is going to sort of ensure that they have a better life and better educational outcomes. And Andrea Edwards Brown will be walking us through that. Mrs. Brown, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having the Early Child Commission. We're happy to be here. So I'm going to go ahead and try and share my screen. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about what it is that we do here at the Early Child Commission as it relates to the work that we do with our children and foundational learning, right? So it's really early childhood education or development. At the early child level, we look at developmental outcomes. Our children are growing and developing, how they're attaining those skills that they need, to move on for further learning. And so it is important that we look at what is called executive functioning. And those skills prepare you for further life, further activities in order to, interact and build relationship with others as we grow older. And so those skills are necessary at the early child level. And so we're going to really look at the Early Child Commission. And so we're going to take a look at our vision, because our vision really speaks volumes to what it is that the Early Child Commission hopes to accomplish. And so at the Early Child Commission, we hope that all children will have access to quality early childhood development services, enabling the realization of their full potential. And so foundational learning here is critical, because if it it is that the access level at the early childhood in the early childhood sector is not what it should be, and the services are, below par, then we're going to have a challenge. And therefore, we have what is called the Early Childhood Act and Regulation, which looks at which would have denoted standards for the operation, management, and administration of early childhood institution. And it is through this legislative framework we are enabling our children to have this access and also realize their full potential. And so our vision also speaks to the Commission thrust to have those integrated services being delivered to our children, not just services, but high quality early childhood programs and services, which will provide them with equitable access. And early childhood for us, our children 0 to 8 years old, and we need them to be in a healthy, safe, and nurturing environment where they're able to grow and thrive. And so as the Early Childhood Commission was formed, we work from what is referred to as our National Strategic Plan. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about our strategy map, which you are now seeing on the screen. And so on our strategy map, we looked at different areas. We wanted to have national impact, as is evident right here. Are you able to see my slide, by the way? And I'm pretty sure it's not in slideshow. I'm gonna get that done now. From current slide. All right, beautiful. All right, so we're looking at our strategy map. And so our strategy map wants to look at some national impact that we wanted to have. And so we wanted to have children who are critically thinking, who are socially competent and healthy, and they are ready for life. And as we continue with the national impact, we wanted to have parents who are informed, educated, involved, and supported in meeting early childhood development needs. And so that is our first aim. And then we wanted to look at our customers. How are they feeling? Are they satisfied? And so we wanted to ensure that our children's special needs are taken care of, as well as having fathers and mothers and guardians who are involved and satisfied with services provided to their children. And so we look again at the early childhood services provided. And for us to do this for our customers and for the nation, then we have 5 processes, and those are referred to as our internal processes within the National Strategic Plan for Early Childhood Development. And so our first internal process is effective parenting, education, and support. And our second process is effective preventative health care. And our third is effective screening, diagnosis, and intervention for children at risk. And we also looked at safe, learner-centered, well-maintained early childhood facilities, as well as effective curriculum delivery by trained early child practitioners. And I think that would be of particular importance for this discussion, as it is that we're looking at foundational learning and how it is that our children are doing. And the delivery of the curriculum really sets that pace and the foundation for our children to continue further on in life. And that safe environment also, denotes how it is that they are going to perform. So here it is now. We're gonna look at our different learning environments, because we needed some environments for us to be able to accomplish these processes in. So we needed, that the sector and the sector agencies to come together and be targeted in meeting the needs of the nation's children. And we also needed timely and clear and current information. So research was important to us. Resource mobilization is important to us. And so, and evidence-based decision making. And so here it is, the Early Child Commission continues the work to set the pace so we can have foundational learning on its way. So what is foundational learning? All right, so early learning and care in Jamaica covers children age 0 to 8, but gaps exist in governance as the law only regulates. When I talk about regulate, for example, the Early Childhood Act and Regulation has precedents for children 0 to 8. So we look at policies for children between 7 to 8 years old. However, as it relates to regulating early childhood institutions. It's really those institutions with children up to 6 years old. And so data from the multiple indicator cluster survey shows that while children in early childhood institutions meet developmental milestones, they struggle with foundational skills in grades 2 and 3. And so as we continue to have this conversation, it's important to note that 94% of Jamaican children ages 3 to 4 are developmentally on track. It means that their developmental outcomes are what they should be. They are walking, they're talking, they're jumping, they're upping, they're socializing, they're, engaging in play, having fun with their peers. Those are some of the simple things that we look at when we talk about development. All right. And so if it is that your child is able to play with another child, it prepares them to adjust further in life because they're not social with others. However, by grade 3, only 48% of these children demonstrate basic reading proficiency. And so simple things like letter identification, sounding out letters is critical as we look at child development. However, realize that putting those things together and bringing it all together at a certain age, we have a deficiency. And also, only 34% demonstrate basic numeracy proficiency. And so that's simply identifying numbers at the EC level, counting, understanding one-to-one correspondence, etc. And so we have to look at whether or not there is a disconnect between early childhood success and later academic struggles. And so it is suggested that there may be gaps in the continuity of the curriculum, or there may be instructional quality or monitoring issues, right? And so the focus is ensuring that transition from early learning to primary education builds foundational skills. And that is of utmost importance to the Early Child Commission. And so we continue with the discussion as we look at what we do here. I talked about our curriculum before, and there's a conceptual framework that provides a foundational framework for early childhood care, education, and development in Jamaica. It outlines the principles, beliefs, and values that guide the development of our children and the implementation of early child programs in the country. And so this framework guides the structure of the current curriculum. And so we have some key areas within the framework that we're going to look at. And so we want to look at, in the curriculum, you would identify the learning outcomes. So the child should be able to, hop or skip. We wanted our ECPs, or early child practitioners, to take a child-centered approach. The curriculum is integrated, and so it's not subject-based. And so if you're talking about the plants outside, we talk about, different types of plants. We talk about the colors of the leaves and the flowers, etc. So it's integrated, right? So we try to bring everything together. It's play-based, and so the children are expected to explore and discover and identify whatever it is that they are doing through play. And we also look at our developmental objectives. A number of theories would have identified that, these are some of the activities our children should be doing by the time, for example, they get to 4-year-old. They should be able to at least, close, bring a zipper up and down, simple things like that. They should be able to up on one leg, and so on. And so we also look at the emphasis on early childhood education and how it is that that must be carried out and emphasized for our teachers to be able to deliver to our children that, quality ECD experience. And as we have those things in place, we're expecting our children to develop as expected. However, besides setting the foundation for foundational learning, there's also the need for early intervention. And so what we have at the Early Child Commission is a process that requires some amount of early identification for our children. And so we have what is called the Jamaica School Readiness Assessment. And from the Jamaica School Readiness Assessment, we have a number of processes that we go through. And so we look at systematically capturing our children's observation records. And so in the early childhood setting, you're expected to do daily observation for your children, recording their likes, their dislikes, their interests, and their experiences, right? And so from this data, you're able to identify our children through screening using the Jamaica School Readiness Assessment who may need further support. And so to bridge that gap, or to not allow our children to be falling behind when they get to grades 1 to 3, and for us to experience, low numbers as it relates to children who are developing their foundational learning skills, which is basic numeracy and literacy. And then we do this assessment, right? And from doing the assessment, individual learning profiles are prepared, and then different referral processes or interventions takes place. And so here we have the Jamaica School Readiness Assessment. And so we're going to look at the data, because the question was, what is the data saying? And so from where we sit at the Early Child Commission, this is the data we have related to children who may have gaps in foundational learning. And so here it is that the percentage of children requiring no action declined over the years from 63.2% in 2022 to 57.1% in 2023 and 54.4% in 2024. Conversely, the proportion of children referred to an Early Child Commission field officer increased from 28.2% in 2022 to 35.7% in 2023 and 37.9% in 2024. And so the percentage of children requiring monitoring in class remain relatively stable and fluctuating between 7.2% and 8.6%. And so these trends indicate a growing need for intervention, possibly reflecting increased developmental and learning challenges amongst our children. And so with these numbers, we're able to say, the intervention in the 5-year-old class may need to improve. As you look at this particular school, this particular child, not forgetting that different circumstances may impact what it is that we're seeing in the numbers. But these are numbers, and we believe that if we're able to do early identification at the early childhood level, then early intervention is going to be something that we should be able to accomplish when the children get to the 5-year-old class. And so by the time their foundational learning skills are assessed, when they get to grades 1 to 3, then we shouldn't have a gap as it relates to early literacy and numeracy. And so here it is that we have some policy implication. And so because of the nature of what early childhood is, and the fact that we believe that it should be, moved on or transitioned into the grades 1 to 3, and grades 1 to 3 is considered early childhood. We believe that the Early Child Commission needs to have a more hands-on approach within those classrooms from grades 1 to 3. And so the play-based curriculum, even though it is encouraged and it is designed in that manner, can come alive and can be, something that is continuously implemented. And then we believe that we should have, to introduce some standardized childcare education and health and development integrated system that is able to analyze and track students' progress over time. And so the relevant interventions can be more targeted. We also, advocate for reduced class sizes for better individualized learning. And we need a little more attention on, training on foundational learning as it relates to literacy and numeracy instruction. How is it that we deliver those things to our children? How is it that we individualize the attention? Because even as we grow older, we tend to talk about, we're individuals, but children more so need that individual attention if they're going to succeed. And we need some more targeted intervention for our boys, especially those in the rural areas. Technology is less, the attention to them is that they learn differently. I remember years ago, There are kids who just couldn't sit in a classroom to learn, but if you give them a fun way to do it, there was a particular school in Portmore. When she did letters and numbers, it was like a hopscotch outside, and it would be a break between the lesson. And so whatever the lesson was, if it was about plants and they're learning the letter P, she had a hopscotch drawn on the outside of the school. And so when they go out, they would identify all the fruits and the related things for P, and they would also be able to identify the letter P. And so when you get to do a little bit more, activity, it tends to stick. Some of us like to write when we're being taught and so on. So it depends. All right. And so we need parental engagement and initiatives to reinforce learning at home. Learning at home is critical for our children to continue with foundational learning skills. And in addressing this gap, we will need to enhance foundational skills and development and promote equity and improve long-term educational outcomes for all Jamaican children. If we're able to plug the gaps, we're able to, provide what we need for all our Jamaican children. Final story, years ago, I have a son, and years ago, he was in grade 3. He was not able to read. But then I made it my point of duty to sit with him and read with him every evening, even though it was not that I knew exactly how it should be done, but it's as simple as this. I read the first sentence and I asked him to read the second sentence until I stopped reading sentence by sentence and he didn't even recognize. We moved from paragraphs, so I would read the first paragraph and he would read the second paragraph until he was able to read the entire story on his own. By the time he got to grade 4, he was reading on his own. I remember buying simple things like Diary of the Wimpy Kid for him. And by the time I leave the bookstore and gave it to him in the car, by the time we get home, we drive like 45 minutes to get home, he was finished with the book. And so it is really putting in that effort as parents as well, and also ensuring that the systems are in place and continue to have processes throughout the early childhood sector so we can get the best from our children, or we can get the best results as we aim, to provide high quality early childhood development services for all Jamaican children. That is it from me. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. Thank you so much. There's one question on my end. So I'll open the floor with questions and then we'll invite. I wanted to know if there was a big difference in the data between rural and urban numbers. If we found maybe from about 5 to 8, if children in certain spaces were doing better. So were rural students being left behind? Is there a big difference between rural and urban children in this regard?
All right, so in this instance, I will not be able to answer that question. I'll have to probably go back to the research department to ask the questions. Because for example, probably if you interrogate or look at the Mix Plus data, which is available online to most of us, you may be able to see that difference. But then again, remember at the early childhood level, we really monitor and regulate schools with children 0 to 6 years old, and policy responsibility for children older than 6 to 8.
6 to 8. Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mrs. Brown. There's a question in the chat, and Dashawn wants to know if there are any reporting mechanisms or data indicating early signs of antisocial behavior in children.
All right, so the Jamaica School Readiness Assessment, it has, this can take a while, this can take a long time, right? So it talks about different areas, and so there's an area that looks at behavior, right? And so it has 3 compartments. There's a section that looks at behavior. And so for the 4-year-old, that section or the entire Jamaica School Readiness Assessment is done. And based on the results from that, we continue our assessment. And so it all depends on what it is that you are referring to. We talk about antisocial behavior. And small children are not readily sociable, but they are taught to socialize. And so it is dependent on their interactions with others. you know, how it is that they will behave. But if you detect antisocial behavior, it's important to inquire, especially if it's a child that you're used to and their behavior would have adjusted or changed, then you need to have a conversation to see what it is that is happening. But yes, the Jamaica Screening Assessment would have done that. Dr. Tortello, your hand is up.
Right.
Yes. Hi, Andrea. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon to the JN team. Happy to be here with you all. I wasn't going to ask you a question, Andrea. I was going to ask if maybe I should go next because the presentation that I will do follows on a lot of what Andrea has said, in a little bit more detail of the mixed data rather than, but I don't want to take away from Mrs. Davidson if she wants to go next.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Tortello. I think the call is mine, Mrs. Davidson. Miss Davidson, I'm sure wouldn't mind. So no problem. We can have you go next to sort of expand on what Mrs. Brown has said, especially because of some of the questions that have been coming up.
Yeah, just because
Vivian?
it follows on, I think, based on what Andrea has done and shared with you all. Can you share your screen or you want me to share my screen? Would it go more seamlessly if you all do it?
No, it'd be easier if you did.
Okay. All right,
But just
so let me.
as you share your screen, I'm just going to open the floor to find out if there are any other questions specific to the ECC or anything else Mrs. Brown presented on that we want to sort of get her responses on now before Dr. Tortello begins her presentation.
You've seen, okay, from the first.
All right, no other questions. All right, thank you so much, Mrs. Brown. We'll circle back if there are any questions, but thank you for your time. Thank you for being a great presenter and introducing to us the Early Childhood Commission. And we'll be back in about 10 minutes with any other questions that may pop up in the chat. All right, so
Are you seeing it?
we're seeing your screen. So we're on to Dr. Rebecca Tortello, and she's the education specialist at UNICEF. And she'll be talking to us about aligning Jamaica's education data with global developmental goals. So we know about Jamaica, Vision 2030 for Jamaica, and we know their global best practices, but we want to see how Jamaica lines up with that and what our data is saying. And so Dr. Tortello will be walking us through that and building on what Mrs. Edwards-Brown has said so we can see what's really happening, because we're looking at the data and we want to know what's happening for our children. Dr. Tortello, over to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Okay, so I have a lot of slides. Please do not be scared or upset at the graphs. I'm going to try to simplify them and make us go as quickly as possible so that we can get to Mrs. Davidson's presentation and then any questions that you might have. So some of what I'm going to say is going to reinforce what Andrea has shared. And the truth of it is that most of the presentation has to do with what's happening locally in Jamaica. So when we refer to, and Andrea already referred to, the Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey, the acronym is the MIX. The MIX itself is a global tool. So it's a globally validated, reliable household survey. So we ran that survey in 2021 into 2022. And then we spent another year analyzing the data. It's a lot of data. It crosses multiple sectors, not just education, any sector where, that affects our children. And then Andrea referenced the Mix Plus, which was a secondary round of data collection, which involved phone calls with some of the initial participants who agreed to the phone calls additional survey. And we're currently developing a series of policy briefs based on that data, which for the most part underscores what the mixed household survey data showed us in any case. So the point I'm making here is that the data itself is comparative across countries. So when I'm saying what's happening in Jamaica, it gives you an idea. It can give you a better idea of the picture. So if I say that 50% of our children are not yet reading by age 7 and 8, you know that that's not a good thing, right? And that in other more developed countries, that's not the case. The only tool that we currently have really other than our CXC data, right, is something called the PISA, which is for the first time Jamaica participated in the PISA in 2022. That's a global assessment that focuses on math reading, and science at age 13, 14. It was not the best time for Jamaica to participate in that because it was in the middle of the pandemic. It was right after a lot of school closures and hybrid schooling. So that for sure colored the results. And it's a very expensive test to participate in. So I don't know if the country plans to do another PISA in another couple of years, but I will refer very briefly to the PISA results as I go through. So as you can see here, generally, our academic performance remains below global averages on all fronts, except perhaps vocational subjects. And this is true for most of our students, especially our boys. It is true that the COVID pandemic exacerbated these results. It is true that the mix was also collected during the pandemic, which would have affected and impacted some of the results, but it is what it is. The fact of the matter is that we have work to do. We have had some successes, and I will highlight those. It's not changing the screen. Okay, so looking at the PEP from 2024, you'll see these numbers here. They're not horrible. So we have almost 70% proficiency in English, 60% in math, 70% in science, 67% in social studies. So this is coming up. I mean, it's an improvement. The PEP, as you know, if you've been following the news, is also under review. I'm not actually sure what that means. We have not yet been part of those conversations. I don't know if Mrs. Davidson has more insight on that, but apparently next year's PEP will be different from this year's PEP. At the secondary level, we see that we have, for the most part, secondary level completion rates are not horrible. They are different for our boys than our girls, and I'll go into that a little bit more. Here's the PISA data that I referenced earlier. So it wasn't a large sample, 3,800 roughly students across almost all of our high schools, but they scored less than the OECD average in all three areas. That's not good. But I don't want to be negative the entire time. I want to also point out that one of the areas that we scored the best in was a subcategory of resilience, where apparently we outperformed other countries, including more developed countries, in terms of however the PISA team marks and explains resilience. So that means that there's something in our psyche that allows us to keep bouncing back, and that's something that we need to look more closely at to determine how we can maximize that. You all referenced the CXC pass rates at the beginning of the session. Last year, low, right? Low in math, very low. And so what has happened is that there's been a lot of attention being paid to math in specific schools where there's a belief that they were just under a certain number of being able to report X number of passes. And so there have been camps taking place at Math and Easter as the students went into this recent CXC cycle. Similarly, in the sciences, we're still low. Look at the numbers there. None of the 5 subjects had a pass rate greater than 80%. That's what we really would like to see, right? We would like to see passing rates above 80%, but where we see those is in our vocational subjects. Look at the numbers there. That is really something that we need to be paying more attention to, in my personal opinion, as a nation. And we have seen that there is greater interest and investment taking place in high schools across the nation now, in terms of upgrading their labs, right? So, and in their teacher training colleges. So that's a step forward to respond to the fact that we really shine in many of these subjects. So another positive note from the PISA is that when the students were asked, Mrs. Davidson, you'd like to hear this one, the students said that they felt safe at school, that they felt that they belonged at school, that they felt that their teachers were spending extra time with them, and that the majority of the schools from our mixed data have access to guidance counselors. That's a big change, and that's a very positive. I do want to underscore how important that is. This is just to give you, I'm not sure if this presentation will be shared afterwards, Jay and team, but just to give those who are interested in how data collection works an idea of the numbers and how we collect it. So we trained young people to go out across the nation in partnership with Statin and the PIOJ and the IDB. And this is the number of households, the number of women, the number of children, etc. And all of the reporting is tied to the SDGs because our Vision 2030 reporting is also tied to the SDGs. So education is SDG 4, and there are a lot of subcategories that fall under that. So it's such as early childhood education, primary, secondary, and then, of course, out of school. So when we talk about reading and what we ask the children, so we looked at children who were in the ages of, on the screen, 7 to 14, And we looked at those in particular are 7 to 8 or who were in grades 2 or 3. So we know that you could be 9 and in grade 2 or 3, and you could be 6 and in grade 2 or 3. But we really focused on trying to disaggregate the children who were grade 2 and 3 age levels, which is 7 and 8. So this is an example of what a child would have been asked to read and then asked questions based on how well he or she read this little short story. And this is what we found, right? 50% of the children who were 7 and who were in grades 2 or 3 could read most of the words in that story. 43% could answer questions, comprehension-related questions. And so when you add that all together, it's about 40% that met the criteria to be considered as having foundational reading skills. What we see, and you see the arrows that are coming up on the screen now, is that as the children get older, they catch up. So by the age of 14, we know that they've met the criteria for foundational reading skills, but obviously we don't want that. We want them to meet it when they're at the actual age. So we have some work to do here. 40% is not where we want to be. 40% have not met. Let me rephrase it. So 60% roughly have met. And what you see is that our girls, as we know, tend to outperform our boys. Our urban students tend to outperform our rural. If you are a child of a parent, of a mother in particular, it's the mother's education level that is really considered to be the factor. Of a mother who has had post-secondary education or more, you tend to perform better. And if you come from a wealthier family, you tend to perform twice as well as if you come from a lower income family. So in terms of numeracy, just to give you an example of what is actually asked, because you hear the data thrown around and you don't really necessarily know what the children were asked. So in a case like this, they were asked to name the numbers, and they were asked to look at these number pairs and tell us which is the biggest, which is the smallest, which one is bigger, which one is smaller. Then they were asked to do these simple addition problems. So you see it has single digit and double digit addition. And then they were asked to do this kind of number sequencing to say what would come next based on these patterns that you see here. And then what did we find? For the most part, we did better at number discrimination, being able to identify the numbers, than we did in any other category. And so what we found is that, in terms of actually having foundational numeracy skills, only about 30% had that. So we have a crisis in math that begins in the early years for reasons that we need to figure out, and we are working to figure out. Again, what you'll see is that as you get older, it kind of levels out. But again, we want to have it working better. We want to have our students working better with both math and reading from a younger age. The same criteria tends to apply here, where, again, if you have a mother who has had post-secondary level education, you tend to perform better if you live in an urban setting and if you come from a wealthier household. But it's not as drastically different if you look at the numbers here. So, but there's still, some critical data to factor in. When you look at our school completion rates, we don't do badly here. We do have a drop off as you get older. Obviously, people may not stay in school. They may go to trade school or go into the world of work. And we're pretty close to a lot of the national targets in these cases. But we do have, of the children that leave our system, they tend to be more boys than girls. Girls will tend to leave. The reason that girls tend to leave would be teenage pregnancy, and that's a smaller percentage of the overall cohort. Again, those of our youth in this age range who tend to complete upper level secondary education, again, girls slightly outperforming our boys, urban doing slightly better than rural, and of course, wealthier families doing better than lower income families. Attendance is not our issue for the most part in Jamaica. What is our issue is quality of the education delivery. Again, these characteristics are repeated for all of the data collection categories that I'm mentioning, and you can see that there's a trend where girls tend to outperform, urban tends to outperform children who come from a family with a mother who has post-secondary level education, and children who come from upper income families. We also looked at out-of-school youth, and we noted that the biggest problem is in our teenage years, where we have 13%. And mostly 13% of our boys in the category of the households that we were collecting data from are not in school. So again, I think Andrea mentioned the issue of boys. The issue of boys is a unique problem to the Caribbean and to this English-speaking Caribbean region. In other parts of the world, the issue is girls and girls being denied their right to education. In our case, it's not that our boys are denied the right to education, it's that they stop attending, or a family may not prioritize sending a boy. If they have 3 girls or a girl, they might send the girl more to school. It's a cultural belief that the rate of return on your investment is higher with a girl child than a boy child. So we're working to dispel that. Here we're at early childhood. This is what Andrea referenced. So 94% of our children, and this is a global indicator, early childhood development indicator, are on track at between ages 2 and 4. That's wonderful. That's big news. It should be shared and broadcast everywhere. But we still have some work to do, because we believe that the 6% that are not really there, are not really on track, might be our children with special needs. And Andrea was sharing with you some of the mechanisms and the tools that we have in place, which many other countries do not have. I want to also emphasize, certainly not developing countries. So you guys on this call are probably of an age group where maybe you have a child health development passport, which you received at birth. That child health development passport is the first of a number of tools that track our children's development if used correctly. They are early screening tools, which are supposed to help us to identify issues as early as possible and refer our children to requisite care in the clinical setting. So we have the CHDP, that's the acronym. Then we have the Age 4 Readiness Assessment, Andrea mentioned. Then we have the Grade 1 Individual Learning Profile. And none of these are tests that the children sit down and take. These are observation tools. We're not asking children at 4 and 5 and 6 to sit down with their pencil in hand and complete a test. The system is test-based enough. These are assessments to help us identify how better to assist our children to get them on the correct path as early as possible. We are on the road. We are not there yet. We still have a lot of work to do, some of which involves digitizing the materials so that we can have real-time access to them, being better able to follow up with the children who have been identified as having particular challenges, creating more teachers who are more comfortable with teaching mixed ability classes and providing those adaptive teaching materials, and follow-up areas, locations to go for follow-up assistance as needed across the island. Right now, many of that follow-up therapeutic assistance is centralized in Kingston. This, I'm almost done. This is looking at what's happening in the home. And so you'll see why you're seeing the green and the orange is that in this case, we were able to compare the multiple indicator cluster survey tool that was administered in 2022 to the last time it was administered 10 years before in 2011. And you'll see that we have improved on some parts and regressed on others. So one of the ways we've improved is that more of our children have access to play materials, but less of our children have access to books. Now that could be because, and when we said books, we meant any form of reading material. So whether it was reading on a screen or reading in print. So that's important, because if we're not reading and not ready to read and not emergent literate in grade 1, one of the issues is that we don't have enough books in our homes and enough print material in our communities. I've already said this. For the most part, attendance is not our issue, but because this data was collected during the pandemic, my personal opinion is that it impacted the early childhood data, because the ECC also has its own mechanism of tracking attendance and enrollment, and the numbers don't necessarily correlate. So I don't think it's quite as dire as this data is showing in terms of our attendance at the early childhood level. Again, this is the same slide you've seen before, similar issues with girls and boys, urban, rural, mothers of a higher educational level. And then in terms of the skill sets of our young women in that age 15 and above, you can see that we're increasing in our ability. This is computer related skills, because living in a knowledge economy, being able to access online information and do online activities and do basic computing is more and more critical. And, we're not where we want to be. We're a little bit under 50%, but, it could be worse. It could be worse. One of the other characteristics of the SDGs is gender equality. And I've told you that one of our issues is boys. So we found that we weren't horrible in terms of opportunities that are open to both our boys and our girls, but that we have to pay more attention to our boys and why we are losing some of them from the system. Is it that what we're teaching is not resonating? Or is it the methods that we're using? Is it a combination of both? What can we do? There's going to be an upcoming conference that's going to delve deeper into this in July, I think, spearheaded by the Jamaica Teaching Council. There are a lot of curriculum materials and teacher training that takes place based on experiments that have taken place in our classrooms and in our schools to figure out what's going on with our boys, but we clearly need to scale that up. This is just to give you what I'm sure you already know, is that in the pandemic, our children who came from wealthier homes had significant advantages of those who came from lower income homes. And the impact of this is something that the education sector is going to have to grapple with for many years to come. And last couple slides, just to show you that our parents are involved, at least the data that we were able to find, that our parents are generally involved. We need to get them perhaps more involved, but this data is not disheartening. It's actually quite encouraging that almost 80% of the children told us that they could get help with homework at home, that 7 out of 14 of them said they at least had a few books to read, and that 7 out of 14 of them reported that their parents had direct contact with the child's teacher to discuss the child's progress. So just to close now, some of the highlights. We need to make sure that our attendance rates stay on track, especially at that secondary level for our boys. We need to focus more on ensuring what's happening at grade 1, which is where the public provision of education really kicks in, meaning specific school fees are not charged. There are discretionary fees charged by different schools that are called different things, but the government provision is there at the public in the public sector, and grade 1 is a critical year. What's happening in that transition period between age 5 and grade 1? What can we do better that helps us to be on track by grade 2? How can we make sure that we're targeting the children who come from lower income families, doing a better job of that, and using a collaborative approach to poverty alleviation as part of that strategy? We need to look at our out-of-school youth, especially our 15 to 16-year-olds and our boys. And that for the first time, a lot of data that we collected, some of the data that we collected is giving us insight into what's happening to our children with disabilities who are in the sector. And it's an opportunity for us to have more targeted intervention in terms of how our teachers are teaching in mixed ability classrooms, which is really what most of our classrooms are. I think that's it. Just to wrap up, to tell you what UNICEF is doing. We're working with a number of other developmental partners across the UN, the World Bank, the IDB, the ministry to implement one of the core recommendations of the Education Transformation Commission, which is the rollout of the National Education Management Information System. The UN loves acronyms. That acronym is EMIS. And that means that we would be able to have real-time data on a number of categories. The first 2 that are in the sector right now are attendance and behavior. We're also helping to create greater resiliency in terms of how our schools are built infrastructure-wise or retrofitted to make them more climate resilient. We're working on online tools that can also be accessed offline in the case of a future emergency. If schooling is cut off, that schooling can continue. That's the Learning Passport. There it is in the Learning Passport. There's the website. Has specific content that focuses right now on grades 1 to 3, so foundational literacy and numeracy, and we're building out grades 4 to 6. And a lot of teacher capacity building. We work very closely with both the ECC and with Mrs. Davidson and the Guidance Counseling Unit to support evidence-based teacher training on foundational literacy and numeracy, on reducing, mitigating, and responding to violence in our schools, promoting play as a teaching and learning tool, promoting overall healthy starts, healthy nutrition throughout our schools, like the school nutrition policy, and mental health and psychosocial support, which really became a big focus during the pandemic and remains such, and greater resiliency in the system and out-of-school youth. This is my last slide, encouraging those of you here who do not know about our U-Report platform to Google U-Report, to add this number, to become a U-Reporter, allowing us to tap into your ideas and thoughts on various issues of national importance to youth periodically, as well as access to our U-Matter counseling chat line, which can refer you to assistance as needed. And then our Fundu chatbot, which has a series of mini tasks that are aligned to heart and helps to upskill and give our young people new different ideas on different career pathways. So it's like a career coach via WhatsApp. That's it for me. So I know I took longer. I'm sorry, but I had a lot of data to share.
And wonderful data to share. Mrs. Davidson, you're laughing?
Mrs. Davidson is my good friend, so she's
I just enjoy listening to Dr. Tortillo and her passion
Yes.
for education
Mhm.
and her commitment to be involved. She does not stay on the sidelines and issue directives. She gets in the field and is fully immersed in whatever program or initiative we're putting forward, and especially with the
Mhm.
support from UNICEF. So I was just laughing when she said she has a lot of data to share, because it is true. She
Yeah.
really does. And that's because of her real commitment to education in our country.
Education. Well, Mrs.
Yes.
Davidson, I think I could hand over to you to thank her on my behalf.
Well,
But
Mrs.
you
Davidson,
did a
thank you. You've
wonderful
done a
job.
great job. That's fine. No thanks necessary. Thank you for the opportunity to share. Please
Well,
follow
thank you.
UNICEF on all platforms to stay informed, the Ministry of Education, the Early Childhood Commission. Really, we're trying to
Absolutely.
put out more information, honestly, more regularly. We all can do a better job, but we're trying.
Absolutely. And just to join you on signing up for your report, young people, sign up for your report. Do not leave this call and you haven't signed up for your report. Check out their Instagram. You'll find it there. Thank you so much, Dr. Tortillo. There is a question in the chat. I'm wondering if it's better suited for Mrs. Davidson, but I'll posit it anyway. Daniel Perkins is asking if there are any statistics that speak to the impact of teacher attrition rates on academic outcomes and student stability.
I don't know that either Mrs. Davidson or myself can answer that. We haven't done that study, to be honest. I can't answer that. You know,
Okay.
but we do know obviously that the quality of teaching has a direct, there are some things that we know from research in terms of what impacts student performance.
Mhm.
One important factor, and you've heard me say it multiple times, is the education level of the mother. Super important factor.
Mhm.
Another one is the availability of resources. And then the third one, of course, is the qualification and interest level of the teacher. So if teacher attrition is happening and schools are turning over teachers a lot, obviously there's
Right.
going to be a detrimental impact. But we don't have that data. Mrs. Davidson, I don't think you have that, but over to you.
Absolutely. There's a few more questions, Dr. Tortillo. And in my experience, when I was in second form, I believe, and I went to the island's best high school. But when I was in second form, I had
What
like
high school is that? Is
I
that
went to no, I
my
went
high
to
school?
Glenmuir. I went to Glenmuir.
Oh, okay.
I think
Okay,
when I
then.
said best, everybody on this call just knew which school I went to. But the point was, I had like
Okay.
3 different math teachers, and I think that's where I fell off with math. I think that's where my dread for math sort of developed when I had 3 different teachers. But also, I wanted to know if there was a primary difference between rural and urban public institutions that would account for the differences we're seeing in rural and urban.
Well, you know, I think what's happening more is the fact that we have lower rates of attendance in the rural areas, and that has to do with the distance that children tend to have to travel, or the
Right.
difficulty in securing transport because they're not necessarily placed at the school that is within 5 miles of where they live, right? So that's part of the issue. The
Right.
fact that there's a rural school bus system now being rolled out is a huge game changer that has long been on the books, and the fact that it's happening is a big deal and
Mhm.
should be celebrated, because it means that our families no longer have to pay to transport their children to school, which is
Yeah,
a big reason why they may not be attending every day. And they have a safe route of transportation to school. So that, I think, is going to change the data between urban and rural. That will be a big factor in reducing that gap.
All right, wonderful. And just one more question. Let me just also check if there's anybody. We're also inviting you to drop your questions in the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them. But also one more question that was sent to my WhatsApp was asking you, Dr. Tortillo, if you could hazard a guess, understanding that you're the education specialist at UNICEF, as to why our math numbers remain so low.
No, it is such a mystery. I don't know, because one of the things that's so interesting to me is the fact that our young children often are asked to go out and perform rather complicated mathematical, problems when they're sent by their parents or their grandmother to the store, the corner shop, and they're
Mhm.
asked to pay for X and come back with the change and get a squeeze of the toothpaste and get this and that, which is much more complex math than children that in upper income families would be asked to do at certain ages. There's a much more independence and responsibility and awareness of the money and actually perhaps doing transactions that middle and upper income children are not doing. So it has to likely do with the way that we're teaching. You know, are we teaching math in a way that resonates with culturally with our children, that makes sense, that you know, again, are the teachers making math exciting? You yourself said, you know, you lost when you had 3 different teachers, etc. There's this thing where people are more hesitant to say that they can't read, but they're not hesitant at all to say, well, I can't do math. And we need to, and that's not only true for Jamaica, but we have to move beyond that. You know, we have to, math is foundational for science. If you don't speak math, you can't do the other sciences, right? And science is a big part of technology, and we're in a global knowledge economy. So we really need to fix the math. And it's not that you heard Andrea say that the early childhood curriculum is play-based, even the lower primary, it's interactive. It's getting people to play with manipulative stuff. We really need to, I'm not a mathematician, so I can't tell you, but I mean, we need to make math more fun, relevant, and exciting, clearly.
Absolutely. And I think perhaps maybe one of the issues, because when I speak to my mother, because my sister and I both struggled with math, and she said, well, she placed great emphasis on our ability to read. So we were reading years ahead of our age, but she never really placed great emphasis on math because we needed to be able to read. But if we could just do basic math, that'd be fine. So,
but you have to read to do basic math as well. Like there are word problems if you can't
there
read.
are word problems. And
so, you know, the CXC is giving us data to tell us, for example, which are the topics, across the curriculum that have given us given Jamaican children more problems. And we are doing some teacher upskilling, capacity building this summer with UWI's Faculty of Science and Technology, focused on those key. And they tend to be things like fractions and probability. So anyway, I've taken so much from Mrs. Davidson. I'm so sorry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tartello. Thank you for answering our questions. And if we have any more, we'll circle back. Mrs. Andrea Edwards-Brown, there's a question for you, but we'll circle back at the end of Mrs. Davidson's presentation. So now over to Mrs. Davidson. We've called your name so many times and you haven't yet had the chance to present, but she's Assistant Chief Education Officer of the Guidance and Counseling Unit of the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth, and Information. So Mrs. Davidson, over to you.
Pleasant afternoon, everyone, and thank you so very much. I have to be joining from a mobile because in the office, we're having severe challenges with the internet. However, just thank you so much that you have chosen this medium to support the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth, and Information and its partners in taking to our nation through our youth where we are, where we have been, what our projections look like, and the role that each of us can play. Because at the end of the day, you know, all of this is about Jamaica Land We Love. And so just to quickly respond to the question about the math, I listened to Dr. Tortella's statement as it relates to those children who must on a daily basis be engaged in these complex money issues. I tell you what, they don't see it as math. So when they're sent to the supermarket or to conduct business for their parents or grandparents and to ensure change is correct, etc., they do very well, but it's never considered math. It is seen as being sent to the shop. And so here is where we have to find a way to use their everyday experiences to teach for many of them. Because the moment you say math, whatever happens, whatever is triggered in the brain, creates a hurdle for many of them. And if you remove the word math and gave them the same problem, just having a conversation, you'd be surprised to see how well they do. So that's something we could bear in mind as well, that they're not seeing all of those mathematical functions as math when they are doing it because it is something they need to do for their mother, their father, their grandparents, or a friend, or for themselves. It's not considered math. It is buying the shoes and you must get your right change. And if it is on sale, this is what I'm supposed to be paying. No, you don't, cashier, this change don't look right because it is on sale and you say 10% off and they'll work out all of that. But it's not seen, what is not seen as math. All right, so on behalf of the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth and Information, we want to commend you and your team for this. And so thank you again for the invitation. Now, it really is for us a very honorable feeling to be a part of this timely and necessary conversation that Jen is hosting. When you look at a theme such as Jamaican children's education outcomes, what are the stats saying? It goes beyond curiosity. It strikes at the heart of accountability, truth, and progress. Too often stats are seen as cold or impersonal, but I can assure you that behind every percentage point, behind every figure, lies the face of a child. It is this child that as a ministry, we are trying to engage in varied ways that he or she gains or excels, you know, and really truly fully achieve his potential. We are looking to recognize that beyond the stats, it's not just the face of the child that we're looking at. We're also seeing a child with potential. This now gives a family hope. And then we have a country with dreams. When we speak of educational outcomes, we're speaking about the soul of our nation. Today, we stand as a country on the edge of educational transformation. And the good news is that we're not waiting for change. We are creating it. Even this particular forum this evening is a part of that transformation. You know, at the ministry, we speak about trend. And of course, just to remind you, it is transforming education for national development. And as a ministry, we're working to implement those 365 strategic recommendations that resulted from the deep national consultations and comprehensive analysis as led by the Orlando Patterson Commission. The recommendations, they may seem like many, but they're practical, they're detailed, and they're bold. The last reporting quarter, we have now achieved 23% of these recommendations being fully implemented. However, this 23% may seem modest, but it represents a critical foundation, that foundation of policy. So it is policy by policy, school by school, child by child that we're addressing. And if you know about change and behavior, one, it's dynamic and it takes time. And so we are recalibrating many things that we have been doing in our sector for achievement of our children's future. When we look at what we're doing, we're not guessing. We are being guided by our Vision 2030. This is Jamaica's commitment, you know, to making Jamaica the place of choice to work, to raise families, and you can all recite the rest. At the heart of that vision is an education system that is equitable, we're inclusive, and we are globally competitive. Take, for instance, what we're seeing in the early childhood education system. As you listened to Ms. Andrea earlier, in 2008, only 25% of practitioners had a level 3 qualification. But today, that number has risen to over 68%. This is not a small victory for our country. No, it is a monumental shift in the foundation of our education system. And we are agreeing with Miss Andrea and Dr. Tortilla, because when our youngest learners are taught by well-trained professionals, it sets off a chain reaction of success throughout their educational journey. And so though we may be coming to you today from three separate perspectives, you recognize that we're really coming to you from the same perspective, because of the data we have recognized the importance of that qualification level as it impacts the growth and development and the learning outcomes of these children. We're not stopping though, we're actively converting under-resourced basic schools. And you heard Miss Andrea speak to that. And so there's better infrastructure, trained teachers, the full support of the state. Now, this is what equity look like. It looks just like this, because earlier when you spoke to the disparity or the perceived disparity between urban and rural, equality is not what we're looking for. It has to be equity. It's giving you what you need. And so when we observe, when we analyze our data, what the trend looks like, then you can recognize why the resources are being spread the way they are being now. When we move up our education ladder or focus on technical and vocational education and training has been sharpened. TVET is in the middle of all of what we're doing. We're singing the STEM song. And if you are now in the system, you'll realize how much we have grown, because for now we have converted under-resourced basic schools at the bottom, but at the top here for technical and vocational education, we recognize that in today's global economy, where skills are positioned and how much skills and having these skills, being competent in them, we are seeing the ripple effect for the society. And so already we have allocated more than about $400 million to develop future skills and technology labs across 15 technical schools. Yes, other schools are coming on board, but this is where we have begun. And so these labs will be equipped to train students in areas like renewable energy. So now you're looking at the emerging careers, yes? We're not deleting or throwing away our traditional careers, but we are also cognizant of what is happening globally. And so we're making sure our students now have access to training in renewable energy, robotics, digital media, and agricultural technology. We're preparing them for the future careers. That's what we're doing. So now there's more to choose from. So we are also recognizing that every student's path is unique. And so we have expanded the sixth form pathways program to include academic, technical, and general options. You see, we know we'll have those students who will need a second chance. We have those who thrive with their hands. And we can see this even from the early childhood level. And so we're supporting this. And so if it is that your focus is more on your skills, it's more focused on your academics, or it is that you're looking for a place in the universities, we are ensuring you are getting the solid foundation for this. Because for us, this is what inclusivity looks like. This is an inclusive education. You have options. We are providing, and yes, we can tell you there were times before when we were not able to do this on this scale, and we're still trying to expand it even more. We know that the best policies can fall short without the right data to support them, and that is why, like Dr. Tortilla tells you, the EMIS is now here. We have started with behavior and attendance data, because if we're going to make the right calls, we must be influenced by the data. And so even your theme, what are the stats saying? It's been supportive of what we're doing here in the ministry. We must have the data. And so the EMIS platform has created for us a real gap stopper in us acquiring that data. And so as we speak, we have at least about 481 members of staff in 108 schools who are now actively using the system to track attendance, behavior, and academic performance. Now we know EMIS gives us the real-time data, and so we're better able to respond, not react, but we're better able to respond and to prepare for what it is that we need to do. We need to recognize also that we're not just leaving it up to the schools, but there's an administrative decision to support our leaders, the mentorship, the hand-holding. That for us is a crucial thing today. We're not just saying to schools, here is a system, run, go do what you have to do. We're saying to schools, here is a system, but we're also here to walk you through these early steps. And we know what those first steps can be like and the support that is required at that time. Are we excited today about where we are as a ministry in the changes that we have seen and the recommendations being rolled out? Yes, we are. More to be done? We will gladly tell you yes, but we have positioned ourselves that we can do this effectively. And so look at this. We are taking professionalizing teaching with the urgency. And so today, by now you'd have heard the Jamaica Teaching Council Act is 90% complete, landmark piece of legislation, game changer. And of course, you know, it provides opportunities in a very legal framework for our educators to be licensed for their continuous development and performance monitoring for all. When we speak to raising education outcomes, we also must raise the status, and of such, we must support our leading classrooms. But even as we celebrate our achievements, we are well aware of the challenges. And so our current data, in some respects, reveals a troubling reality. And this comes through the learning loss, post-pandemic learning loss. And you mentioned it, Sinead, you were wondering if there was learning loss. Yes, our data shows that to us, especially in literacy and numeracy, and this remains significant. And so what are we doing? We are actively responding. And so we have already deployed national assessments along with intensive support for English and mathematics teachers in 56 of our secondary schools. We know the road to recovery is long. It demands sustained effort, teacher coaching, psychosocial support, and strong leadership. And so here's another budget allocation that is of critical focus. We know of the loss. The deployment is the hand-holding, the mentoring, the coaching, the resources that the schools need in an equitable fashion. And then we know that if we put all of that together, that's wonderful. But an area that is of significant importance and was mentioned from the early childhood stage is that of schools operations and nutrition. And therefore, we have allocated $3.6 billion to support school operations and nutrition. $1.7 billion will go towards schools operations and $1 billion for feeding programs, because we well agree a child who is hungry cannot learn. It's almost impossible. It is difficult. And so we also acknowledge the call to go further. Experts have urged that at least 10% of Jamaican children, Jamaica's per capita GDP, will be allocated to early childhood education. I can see Miss Andrea just smiling away when she's hearing this, but we have to, if we're serious about the outcomes, you must start at the root. Yes, we want the tree to be the best tree. We really must start at what it is that we're feeding the tree. What is the root getting? And so, ladies and gentlemen, we know achieving all we want to achieve, it will take political will, strategic partnerships, and national consensus. but it is a goal we cannot afford to ignore as a country. So what does all this data mean for all of us? It means that Jamaica is really making progress to begin with, but urgency must meet momentum. It tells us that true equity in education cannot be a future aspiration. It has to be a current reality. It tells us that investing in teachers, technology, and early learning is not optional. And so Dr. Tortella and Miss Andrea said all of these in different words earlier. And so we're just to tell you, we never sat together and discussed it, but you recognize that we're agreeing that this is important. We, to our private sector partners and civil society organizations, we're saying this is your moment to act. Collaborate, innovate, come join us. Help us build solutions that are sustainable and scalable. We cannot allow the statistics to become dust on a shelf. And so they have to be the blueprint for change. Numbers may seem impersonal, but when properly understood, they are deeply human. They carry the voices of our students in rural Clarendon, urban Kingston, the hills of Portland, and the shores of Negril. They carry the hopes of children with disabilities, of single-parent families, and of underfunded schools. These numbers speak, and they're telling us that Jamaica's children are ready. They are ready to learn, ready to lead, ready to shine. We're actively improving to cater to all our learners. We are the generation that trend for a brighter tomorrow because the future of Jamaica depends on it. And the children of Jamaica, they're counting on us. Thank you so very much.
Oh my God, thank you so much, Ms. Davidson. Thank you so much. Thank you. You know, one of the things you said as you opened, you said all of this is about Jamaica land we love. And I couldn't agree more. All of this is for Jamaica land we love. These conversations, these deep dives into what's happening, where our children are, is all for our little island home. So we have 2 questions in the chat for you, Mrs. Davidson. Daniel Perkins said he recently heard that the Ministry of Education will be increasingly incorporating artificial intelligence within the education system to provide access to textbooks and other resources. And he's asking if this increased incorporation has been able to enhance the ministry's ability to achieve the trend objectives. I think there's also an assumption in this question that they've already started the incorporation of artificial intelligence. So if you could go ahead and tell us, has that incorporation started? And then if it has, are we seeing any positive steps toward achieving the trend objectives?
We know for sure that much preparation would be into what has been stated by our minister, and we wait on the new school year to see the impact. We know it is already satisfying some aspects of the trend initiative, because what it is doing, where we found the gaps.
Oh, just 1 second, Mrs. Davidson. For those of us who may not know, what is the trend initiative? What are the objectives?
We have the trend initiative, the acronym Transforming Education for National Development, is the change initiative of the Ministry of Education that is covered under 7 major pillars. We focus extensively, especially on governance and leadership, curriculum and teaching, and that's the area that I currently am assigned to. Also, early childhood. We're looking at the recommendations were born from intensive research and consultations. And so we have categorized them so that our responses become targeted. And so when we say the trend initiative, we're simply saying this national thrust, this deliberate attempt to transform education for better results, not just CSEC passes, but people becoming better at who they are. You're looking at character development. You're looking at all of these types of achievement. The trend agenda is on a progression. And so, for an example, when we speak to what we're doing in the early childhood sector, we would not achieve everything day one, but we would have set short-term goals, medium term, and long term. And so now we're looking at not just, oh, we're achieving this, but we're also being able to analyze the impact that will also influence the resources needed for the next step. So yes, the trend agenda, which is the national agenda for change in how we manage education, how we teach, how we resource our schools. First time we would have a situation where all schools get a grant. And that's right across the board. But when you look at the Patterson recommendations and you recognize the gaps based on our current data, you realize that it cannot be one size fit all. And so you have to give to schools what schools really need. So that is one area. And so that would be a part of one of the trend objectives. It's not the full objective being reached, but you're using different steps to attain the objective that we want. That would be improved performance in literacy and numeracy. And so everything that we do comes together for that agenda or that objective to be attained. I hope that was somehow a little clearer.
All right, thank you so much, Mrs. Davidson. Daniel, you can let us know in the chat if you have any follow-up questions or if your question was answered. And also, Mrs. Davidson, Jonathan, in recognizing you in your role as Assistant Chief Education Officer of the Guidance and Counseling Unit with the Ministry, wanted to know if guidance counselors are expected to use their skills to participate in improving educational outcomes in schools.
Thank you so much for that question. If I can quickly go to the policy, the National Guidance and Counseling Policies, guidance counselors are actually engaged by the ministry to utilize their skills, their experiences, their competences for us to achieve the national agenda. And so it is an expectation that as a guidance counselor, your skills will contribute to the objectives, the school improvement plan through your comprehensive guidance and counseling plan. And so that is why our guidance counselors are so critical to our system.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So you mentioned, and thank you for clarifying, because one of the things I mentioned was if there was some kind of learning loss from COVID, and you mentioned that there really has been. Could you say exactly what that looked like? I know that may require some statistics, but in terms of the numbers, can you share what that learning loss looks like? And if perhaps you can't share the statistics right now, anecdotally, if you could tell us what that learning loss seems to be over the past few years.
What we looked at, for an example, the results of external exams, and we looked at those standardized tests as well. And so you would see, for an example, in 2023, our literacy rate was 68%. Before 2023, we had actually gone higher at grade 4, because I remembered when we achieved the way over 90% rate, I remembered us releasing those beautiful blue and yellow balloons in celebration under PSA's directives. And so when you compare that to 2023, and these children would be those who lost about 2 years, it's no question that there was learning loss, and we know the varying factors that created it. But so we are now on the trend upwards in recovery, because what we did for these our students, we put several programs and initiatives in place. We engaged the one-on-one, in the virtual learning space. We have also moved towards expanding the day for them to be exposed in a more face-to-face manner. Several subject areas that during the pandemic try as best as we did, we were still not able to reach some. And so they have been given this opportunity to get more lessons from different areas and using different media. And that is what we're trying to do, to bring them back to par as quickly as possible. And so, yes, that's where we are.
All right, thank you so much, Mrs. Davidson. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so we're inviting all questions. If you have any questions, anything that we didn't get to, particularly, I have a question both for Mrs. Brown and also for Mrs. Davidson, because I really do think it'd be remiss of me to have this platform, to have representatives from the Ministry of Education, and not ask about the National School Nutrition Policy. And so particularly for Mrs. Edwards-Brown, I wanted to know if the ECC has been actively a part of discussions and the consultation, just the discussions happening in the ministry about the National School Nutrition Policy, especially because we're moving towards implementation. What will that look like in early childhood institutions? Has there been discussion with the ECC as they're moving towards implementation and the general discussions about the National School Nutrition Policy?
And so as we speak, from our second NSP, if I'm correct, we would have looked at the infant and young child feeding policy. And so those policies would have fed into what is being discussed now. So yes, we are a part of those discussions.
All right, wonderful. And just another question. So I wanted to know if there's a difference, if you've seen, and if the statistics also show a sort of difference between infant schools and basic schools in the data. So you shared some statistics, and I wanted to know if there is any difference at such an early age between students who attend infant schools and basic schools, and what could account for that difference if such a difference exists.
Right. So what we're looking at is children at 4-year-old. The Jamaica School Readiness Assessment, that's what it looks at, right? And so we're just looking at the number of children assessed and their different needs. While it is that these deficiencies or need for early intervention is not dependent on delivery of the curriculum or interaction, so to speak, because it's really looking to see if there are any developmental delays. Developmental delays can be environmental, it can be genetic, it can be a number of things. And so we would not have disaggregated data in that manner. But what we have done is to ensure that children who are needing further assessment, that they are given what is called the Ages and Stages Questionnaire Jamaica. And so we try our best to focus on the purpose and not to blame and separate. So I guess that is a consideration for us, or something that we can also look at to inform or to see if there are any gaps within the basic school versus the infant schools and also those private institutions, because early child institution has literally 3 categories. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Brown. Do we have any other questions? Any concerns that we'd like to bring up? Feel free to open your mic, feel free to send in the chat.
That you were waiting on my response now, Sinead. You said Mrs.
Oh,
Brown
yes.
for the policy.
To ask you about the National School Nutrition Policy, forgive me, yes. To ask you, what
Well,
does that look like? What have you been hearing? How is your unit of guidance counselors a part of that process?
well, we know that when we had the consultation, we know with the consultation that we were all involved, guidance counselors, etc. And so we rejoiced when our honorable minister tabled it, the policy in the Senate,
Yes.
April 9. And so, having been tabled, we now await, because remember, we're driven by the fact that we are saying improvement in student well-being and academic performance is twinned to nutrition. And so this is critical. But subsequent to that, we have also sent a reminder to schools as it relates to the interim guidelines for the sugary drinks in schools.
Mhm, mhm.
And these guidelines have been in effect since January 1, 2019. But just since this month, we have again sent back to schools to say, remember, while we wait on the finalization of this policy, etc., we
Right.
already have these guidelines where we are promoting the student well-being, and we're saying we want the sugary consumption to be reduced because we want to foster those lifelong healthy habits. So for the policy, this is where we are, waiting on the legal framework to play itself out,
Right.
but we also have reminded our schools about the guidelines, the interim guidelines for the sugary drinks in schools. And we resent this, I think it probably was about the 10th or so of May,
Oh,
this very
wonderful.
month. So your
Wonderful.
forum is quite timely.
Yes.
Very,
Oh, thank you
very.
so much. Because that's actually very interesting because I'm not sure if we knew that on our end, and we've been advocating for the implementation of the policy for quite some time. So it's
Yes.
very good that schools have been reminded as recently as this month because we
I'm at
know.
the 14th of May to be exact.
Oh,
Because I
forward me
could
the
just
email,
quickly fly
please.
through.
Forward me the email,
Yes,
please.
schools have been reminded about this, and this was just the 14th of May.
The
So
14th, I mean,
we
forward me
are
the email, please.
serious. And
Yes.
this is also a part of the trend agenda. We are not just saying this needs to be done, this needs to be done. We are actually actively
Working towards it.
engaging in these activities so that our general end goal is achieved.
Wonderful. Big up the ministry. Big up the ministry. All right, wonderful. So we've been working with the ministry on finalizing the National School Nutrition Policy, and we are just as excited as you, Mrs. Davidson, that it's
Yes.
moving along. And so we'd love to have further conversations on that, but we're really excited for that. So please forward me that email, because I think one of the things we also noticed in our advocacy is that though we had the guidelines on sugary drinks in 2019, we had COVID, schools sort of fell off, and then they sort of focused on other things as they came back in 2022. There are more important things, as many would have said. So we're really, really happy that we're back on track with the National School Nutrition Policy and other things. So now we have another question, and this goes to all of our panelists, and we're going to take it really quickly. And Jonathan is asking, do you think there is enough data and studies done on the behavior change and modification methods that work on children displaying disruptive or deviant behaviors in schools? And what more could be done to ensure that our schools have proven and tested methods of discipline? I'm starting with our guidance counselor, Mrs. Davidson. Then we'll jump to Dr. Tortillo, and then to Mrs. Andrea Edwards-Brown.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Truth be told, we have not done, from our perspective, we have not done a full research on the techniques or strategies being used, but a part of the guidance counselor's job function is to develop or to conduct action research that they now provide, because remember, they're on the ground. So they would be conducting the action research to indicate their methods of therapeutic intervention and the impact that these have on our children. And then then we could do this comparative analysis to see what works best, bearing in mind again that although, for an example, cognitive behavior therapy, generally speaking, can be used as a broad base. It's like a broad-based antibiotic, right? It can be, there are factors that could mitigate that. And so that kind of dynamism is crucial. So I love the question because it's something we could look at another level and to see really how similar we are as it relates to our children, as it relates to our global interactions, as to these therapies that most of them, came to us from varying continents, and then we tweak as is necessary. And so that's something we could look at from that perspective. But for now, we wait on the counselors with their action research to show that to us. There was something else I was going to tell you real quickly too, is that, okay, so now I can safely say I'm getting old, right? So Jonathan spoke to what we do, and for the Ministry of Education, as you speak to punitive discipline or disciplinary measures, because bear in mind, discipline is a broad term that speaks to any activity that is repeated over time to bring forth a particular result, and especially one that is conformative and positive. And so discipline is not necessarily flogging or scolding. And if you're a disciplined person, you're going to be on time. You're going to submit your work on time. You're going to be appreciative of others. You're going to be respectful of people's property, etc. All of that is a part of being disciplined. But the Ministry of Education years ago, with great support from UNICEF, and yes, Dr. Tortilla was a part of this, developed an alternative document, a document that gave more than 100 ways that we call alternative discipline. And so where the ministry has that in place, have we been using that in the school system? Not as much as we hoped that persons would use it. And it is not just for senior teachers or guidance counselors, but it's for every educator in the school system. Access has been provided. It is called positive discipline alternatives. And so when we have this, we had the posters, we had the small replicas, we had the larger manual, and every school in Jamaica got it. In fact, this was resent to the system again, strictly positive discipline. Thank you, Dr. Tortilla. Strictly positive discipline. And it gave many ways in which we could administer discipline or teach discipline. And last year, January, last year, March, about 2 or 3 different times last year, this was again sent electronically to the school system as questions were being raised about, it was being raised about flogging, and the ministry again reminded the system that this was the stance, and here it is. Here is your support resource that provides. If you go to the UNICEF's website, it is still there, and you're free to pull it down. And again, from the Ministry of Education. So yes, Jonathan, the ministry has things in place that speaks to how we discipline without creating that physical or emotional scar. And it's very positive in how you help your children to manage that area of their lives.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Davidson, for insight. Thank you. Dr. Torteo, sorry, over to you.
Right. So to pick up on what Mrs. Davidson has said, the thing is the ministry had sent a schools bulletin out years ago and probably repeatedly stating that corporal punishment is not the way to discipline the children. If you think of the word discipline, discipline implies learning. It comes from the word disciple. Punishment does not imply learning. And although corporal punishment is currently only illegal in the early childhood years in the school setting, it's not yet illegal in the home or in the older ages, age levels of the system. The ministry did issue that bulletin, and then they issued information such as that strictly positive manual with guidance for schools and teachers on alternative methods of discipline. In addition to what Mrs. Davidson has said, and the referral systems that the guidance counseling unit has in place, streamlined between the schools and the clinical setting as needed if children are in need of counseling and families are in need of counseling. There's another framework that the guidance counseling unit has been instrumental in piloting and then now rolling out with UNICEF support and support from other international development partners, which has a long acronym called SWPBIS, School-Wide Positive Behavior Intervention and Support, so SWPBIS. And 3/4 of our primary and secondary schools have had at least one staff member trained. Usually schools will set up teams, and the teams will then develop core values that they wish to promote amongst their students, staff, the whole school community. Those core values are well aligned with the concept of character education. They tend to include things like respect, responsibility, honesty, integrity. And the schools will determine ways in which they can model those values at all levels of the system, at all levels of their schooling life and community. So what students can do, what teachers can do, what staff can do, what the vendors who are selling at the gate can do, and they may not be at the gate much longer based on the school nutrition policy, but they're currently there. So what would it look like to show respect in the halls, in the classroom, at assembly, etc. And then the schools develop a monitoring framework and a way of recognizing and incentivizing the students. Different schools do different things. As if the SWPBIS framework is implemented with fidelity and with consistency, what you see is what we have seen is an increased rate of attendance and a decrease in behavioral incidences. So the SWPBIS framework is student-centered and works on being proactive more than reactive. So it's trying to instill mechanisms and oversight monitoring tools that encourage solid behavior versus having to always be responding to negative behavior. There are, of course, systems in place for responding to negative behavior. Mrs. Davidson just gave you some of them. And there's a way of tracking that. Schools report. The EMIS will enable us to have a better idea of the types and which schools are reporting more frequently so that more support can be sent to those schools in the terms of resources, both human and material. So, you know, the thing is, there's a lot of good work being done in the sector, and the information is not, there are courses on SWPBIS and Leadership for Safer Schools with a lot of information for school leaders at the NCEL, National Council for Educational Leadership, offers to school leaders. We know that if you have a strong, involved, consistent, stable school leader, that your school tends to have higher academic performance, safer school metrics, and everybody is happier. The NCEL also offers a child-friendly schools course, which has best practices as shared by local schools, so not taking foreign examples and trying to adapt them to the local context. There's a lot of upskilling, a lot of ways that technology is enabling us to deliver content and training in a much more equitable and flexible and financially feasible way. And the pandemic, that's one of the positives of the pandemic. It has made all of us more comfortable with how we connect online, like what we're doing here now. So SWPBIS continues to become embedded in the sector, and it's a good thing. It's evidence-based, so it's not just one day somebody woke up and said, let's try this. We think it will work. It was tested. There's an entire framework of how to implement and monitor it. Mrs. Davidson herself is a guru. There's an integrated service delivery handbook that helps to guide how the guidance counselors and the school teams are implementing and referring students to and from to the health side, to the health sector, the clinical sector, and back to the school to follow the students. It works at a whole school, small group, and one-on-one. It works at these 3 levels. We could have a whole session on SWPBIS. I'm not doing it justice. There's information if you want to know more. If you Google SWPBIS Jamaica, UNICEF, you'll see videos come up where schools are sharing their core values and how they've been incentivizing, recognizing their students and what they've seen as the results of it. We've evaluated it, so we also know it works in our local context. There was a blip with the pandemic, but schools continued to try to do things online to keep their school community going. And right now, I think it's NCU has been doing, I don't know if you know this, Mrs. Davidson, I hope that you know this. NCU has been doing this series of radio shows, I think it is, where they're looking at sharing kindness or spreading kindness. That may not be the right name of the campaign. But when they reached out to schools and schools talk about how they see kindness playing out in their schools, those are they tend to be referencing SWPBIS, which is a wonderful example of how over many, many years, the concept and the framework is taking root. And it's largely due to the stick-to-itiveness and the persistence of the guidance counseling team and the ministry.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Tortello. Thank you. And so we move to Mrs. Edwards-Brown to sort of tell us what's happening in the early childhood space regarding Jonathan's question on discipline.
Right, so as we look at, behavior management, I want to refer to our standards because there are standards for the operation, management, and administration of early childhood institutions. And so if we go to standard 3, it speaks about interaction and relationship with children. And that is really how it is that the staff, possesses those characteristics and training and the knowledge to ensure that, the attitude towards children promote positive behaviors and reduce difficult and challenging behaviors in children. Because small children tend to model the behaviors that they observe, it is important that we have staff members in our early childhood institutions who are able to display those behaviors for our children to model. And I also want to look at executive functioning and talk about how it is that it allows for self-control in relation to others and interaction with others, and how it helps the brain to, control impulses, which may sometimes contribute to some of those difficult behaviors. And if it is that we're able to teach our children executive function or manage their behavior, so that their executive functions can be developed, then we're able to reduce those difficult behavior at the early childhood level. There are some behaviors, for example, that we may not be able to reduce because, for example, our children who are 2 years old, they're just coming into their emotions, they're understanding how they're feeling, they're just experiencing some emotions. And because of that, it is a little bit more difficult to manage those behaviors. And so we encourage positive reinforcement within the early childhood sector. We discourage the use, for example, of corporal punishment to correct behavior because children will only teach that eating will find solution, will only learn, that eating will give them solutions. And we also encourage our early child practitioners and institutions to have behavior management policies that speaks to how it is that they will, reinforce positive behavior and discourage those negative behaviors. And if it is our children are able to, discover self-control from an early age, then we believe that those troubling behaviors can be reduced. And we also have to bear in mind that there is also the room as it relates to special needs, because children with particular special needs may display behaviors that we find troublesome or disturbing or inappropriate, but it is sometimes attributed to the nature of the challenge or related to that special needs. And so there are a lot of things to consider. But in essence, at the early childhood level, we encourage a positive behavior management, and each early childhood institution should have that behavior management policy, and staff members should be equipped with the characteristics, skills, and knowledge to display positive behavior so our children can model those behavior and become citizens that we hope for them to be.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Just to add to that quickly, what Andrea has been saying, I'll put it in the chat. There's another locally developed strategy called IRE Toolbox, which was developed by the Caribbean Institute for Health Research Care, and they're about to have their conference in a few weeks, which is going to share on all the evidence-based work they've been doing in Jamaica, which has expanded to other countries, called Reach Up and Learn is one of them that works with parents. IRE Toolbox is one that works with teachers and has an IRE Homes component. And the ECC, with UNICEF support, has been rolling out IRE Toolbox, which is an emotionally supportive violence against children, but also FLN, foundational literacy and numeracy focused methodology. And so it also underscores what Andrea was saying. It gives teachers strategies to interact positively with the students. And so it itself is an example of SWPBIS at tier 1, which is with the whole class, a whole school level, sort of focusing on interactions and core behavior. There's an alignment between the IRE Toolbox methodology and the SWPBIS framework. So just to say that the SWPBIS, the acronym, the SWPBIS approach extends to early childhood and it's system-wide, right? And so we've just evaluated the IRE Toolbox training and practices in Jamaica to guide, with the ECC's support, scale up nationally and to include the parenting component, which is called IRE Homes. So I put the site in the chat. People can learn more about IRE Toolbox, and I want to big it up that it's a locally developed tool. It was developed in Jamaica for Jamaicans, but it also has, of course, global application.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm also seeing where Lawman Lynch also responded to Jonathan in the chat, so thank you so much. All right, so I think we've had a wonderful discussion, and I think the expertise of our panelists was on full display. We had the most brilliant panelists you could ever have if you want to talk about education. I want to thank you for taking the time out of a no doubt busy day, because I know a million things probably demand your attention. A lot going on at UNICEF, a lot going on in the ministries, and there's a lot that you have to do, but you took the time from your day to talk to us, to tell us what the statistics are saying, to sort of shine a light on our children and what's been going on with them, and we're so grateful. Thank you so much, Dr. Tortello. Thank you so much, Mrs. Edwards-Brown, and thank you so much, Mrs. Davidson. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the vibes. Thank you for just entertaining JAD. As you know, we are the premier youth organization. So thank you for recognizing that and joining us today. Thank you. So before I hand over to our Executive Director, Shanique Bowden, who will close, there are a few things that I must say. Follow us on social media, right? Follow us on social media. Or social media, we're at Youth Advocate JA on all platforms, so follow us over there. We're opening applications for our advocacy council very soon. So for those of you young people who want to be a part of JA and a part of the work that we do, and we work with the Ministry of Education, we work with UNICEF too. If you want to be a part of the work that we do, we're opening applications very soon. So follow our social medias and you'll see all of that. And you'll have the space to sort of delve into our work. I'm on our social quite a bit. My face is on our social. We're an amazing team. Join us over there. There's also the fact that Dr. Tortello is saying, sign up to be U reporters, and do indeed sign up to be U reporters. We've also done U report polls where we've asked young people questions on sexual and reproductive health rights and also on HIV. So do absolutely sign up. And we're also just thanking you for coming out. It's a Wednesday afternoon. Many things demand your attention, but you are here with us and we are grateful. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Dr. Tortello has also shared the number for U report, so you can just take it down. So that's much easier. You can just take it down there, but you can also check out their social media and you'll be able to find it there. But that's after you leave J on social media. So two things. You're going on Instagram to do two things. At Youth Advocate JA, type that in, and then UNICEF Jamaica, you're going to do those two things. All right, so if we have no more questions, that is it from me. Thank you all for your time. I'm going to be handing over to Shanique, and Shanique will close. I'm Shaniel Allen, and it was a pleasure being your moderator this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shaniel. I know we're at time, and I think Shaniel did me a favor because I had my sticky notes of pointers, and she took about 2 sides with some of the things that she said. But I just wanted to sort of reiterate in closing what we had set out to do with this series. I see a few familiar names would have been at the sessions that we had last week and the week before on violence and on health, respectively. And our idea with pulling together this initiative for Child's Month was to see how best we could create a space to highlight the data around what's happening with our children as it relates to their health, as it relates to how violence is impacting them, and as it relates to education. And what I think was even perhaps a happy coincidence as well, we found in all 3 sessions, is that it also created an environment where we could learn a lot from our different stakeholders about what they're also doing. So while we wanted to know like the impact, what we also organically got from it were the solutions and the resources. So even as the session here was happening, we were discussing here that some of these things that we hear Rebecca speaking about and that we hear Kennedy talk about, we didn't even know existed. And this is a space that we know we have been working in for a while. So it's also good to just find out what the latest is on the resources and information that is out there so that we can also do our part to connect the different persons in our groups, in our network, the young people, to the different services that are available. So I think that's also one of the highlights of the last 3 weeks in terms of what we were able to get from these sessions. Ultimately, my job is to thank you all for coming out. As Shaniel said, you could have been anywhere doing anything on this Wednesday afternoon, but you took the time to be here today. And we hope that you found these sessions as vital and as instrumental to you, and to be prepared to think about how we can work together to take the data that we've learned over the last 3 weeks and translate it into meaningful advocacy. One key thing I do want to mention is that in addition to like our advocacy council and those things, we continue to do our part in sensitizing young people. And so this online series was just one such way. And one of the things that we're looking forward to doing this summer, and especially more so in the new school year, is continuing our health chat series where we go to different schools and we talk to them about HIV, we talk to them about nutrition, talk to them about violence, gender-based violence, different series of short 45 to 90-minute sessions where we get the chance to really engage with students about the things that are really impacting them. So you can stay tuned to our social media. Shani gave you the information to see what we also have planned for the summer in terms of capacity strengthening opportunities and those other sort of initiatives to just keep in the know with the different work that we're doing. So yeah, so in short, it really thank you for participating. Thank you for asking the questions. I'm not sure who Daniel Perkins is, but maybe you will send in an application to be part of our new council. I thought these questions especially were very instructive. But really, thank you very much. And we look forward to doing other sessions like this. This was just a special series for Child's Month, but we definitely see the need to continue these very important conversations. And internally, we will see how we can, branch out from here and continue to engage our very meaningful partners at the UNICEF and at the Ministry of Education and at the ECC and other groups that have worked with us over the last 3 weeks to keep the conversations going and continue working together. Thank you very much. And Mrs. Davison, Shaniel said to send her the email.
Yes, Mrs. Davison, send me the email. All right, thank you, everyone. You may go and have a fantastic day, eat your lunch, do all the fantastic things that you do on a Wednesday. Thank you for joining us. We're grateful. Have a good rest of the day.